In this section, we're going to take a look at how we can get Node.js source code into a running Docker container by using volumes. Now, this source code is actually going to live on our local development machine, but we're going to magically link it into the container using volume support. Let's go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to come on in and start up the Docker client. And you can see that my virtual machine's already running. There's the IP address we're going to hit once we get this all up and running. But first I'm going to run this locally just to show you that we can get this source code up and running, and then we're going to get it running in a container. I'm going to use something called Express. This is a web framework for Node.js, and it has a little feature called Express Generator that'll generate a little sample site that'll make it easy to get started with some Node.js code. So the first thing I'm going to do is run an npm command, and this will install some modules. We're going to install Express and Express Generator. We're going to do these globally because Express Generator will add some command line integration support, which you'll see in just a moment. All right, so we're kind of ready to go. And what I'm going to do from the location, which is really the user account I'm in right now, is I'm going to create a new folder and generate some source code in that folder that's for Node.js. And the way we can do that is run Express. I'm going to give it a folder name. We'll say Express Site. And then I can give it a technology for how to render the views. I'm going to use something called handlebars. So that'll run. And now all we have to do to get this site up and running is, first off, run these commands. So we're going to cd into the folder, and then we're going to install all the dependencies of this particular web application. So this will take just a moment to pull these dependencies down. All right, we're ready to go. And then I'm going to get this running. Now I do have Node.js running on this local machine, of course. That's how I'm running npm and these other commands. But the goal is not to run Node here, it's to run it in a Docker container. But this will show us that the source code's running properly, at least locally to start. So now that I'm in the Express site, I can just type npm start, and this will fire off this little web server here. And now we can come on in. And there we go. We now have a little Express site. All right, so we're off and running. Now that's nice and all, but that's actually just running Express directly from this particular folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and kill that. We'll leave this open to start. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you how we can work with volumes. So we're going to come back to the Docker client. And if I run Docker images, I've already pulled the latest Node.js image that we're going to ultimately create into a container from Docker Hub. And so normally to run this, we would just say Docker run, we'd give it a port, we'd give it the external port, I'm going to say 8080, and then you saw that the Express website that I got going is actually going to run on 3000. And we would say node, but if we run this, we don't have any source code. So basically what will happen is the container will try to start, it'll see there's no command to run, and it'll just exit, it'll just stop. So we're not going to do that. What I'm going to do first is create a volume. Now, the first volume I'm going to show you is going to be this var/www, or I like to call it www to shorten it up. But this is going to create a volume, but it doesn't actually point to our source code. This is just an area that if we did have something running in the container and the path for the running app wanted to write to var/www or read from it, then it would create a volume outside of the container in the host machine. And so now I could say node here for the image, and we'll go ahead and return. And now it just started the container, but again, there was nothing to run. So if we do docker ps-a, you should see that it's exited. So really what happened is it tried to start it, didn't see anything fancy, and then stopped it, but we should now have a volume under the covers. Now you'll notice the container ID. Now what we can do from here is we can say docker inspect and then give it the start of that container ID, or we could do the drunk bork. That's one of the more interesting ones I've seen as an alias, but we'll go with the 03 here. And this will spit out a whole bunch of information about that particular container. And I'm going to scroll back up and we're going to look for something called mounts. All right, there we go. So there's our mounts you can see right there. Now you'll notice that we have a source on the host system that's a really long path, and it uses this name, which is a unique identifier for the particular volume. And it kind of buries it in this folder structure that you'll see right here. Now on the container itself, the alias for this path that's on the host is just var/www. So again, if we read from var/www or we write to var/www, what it's going to really do is be writing to this location or reading from this location. Now that doesn't help us as much with source code because I'd have to get my source code into that folder, and that's not a path I really want to work with. So what I'm going to do is come back down, and we're going to go ahead and remove the container. So again, if we do docker ps-a for all, this will show us all the containers, even the exited ones. And then I'm going to do the normal docker remove that we've learned up to this point, but I'm going to add one more thing. I want to make sure that that volume that's on the host machine also gets removed when we remove this container. So I can do the 03 for the container ID, but by adding -v, that'll go ahead and clean up the volume. Now normally when you remove a container, it's not going to delete the volumes because there might be another container that's using that volume. So if this is the last container that uses that volume, you typically want to clean that up, and that's what I'm going to do here. All right, so now if I do docker ps-a again, you'll notice that we're all cleaned up and we're good to go here. All right, now we have that Express site folder that I created earlier though. So what I want to do is let's cd into that. All right, we can do an ls to basically list everything, kind of like a dir that you normally do on the Windows side. And you'll notice that we have this app.js and some node modules and package.json, and this is pretty standard folders for an Express site. So what I want to do is link this folder into the container and then start up Node, very similar to what I just did earlier. So what we can do is use the volume support that I talked about in a previous section in this module. And so we can do something very similar. We can say docker run, give it a port on the external 8080, internal it's 3000. But this time when I create the volume, I'm going to say let's start from the current working directory. And this is the little shortcut I showed earlier you can do. And this is going to be the directory that the volume in the container is actually going to point to. Perfect, because that's what we want. We want to point to our source code, which is in this Express site. Now, the name, again, we're going to use is var/www. Now, I made that up. It could have been something else, but I'm going to go with that. And then normally we would say node. And then if you want to run any commands in the container, we could run that npm start command. Now, we're going to have a problem here. It won't actually run npm start from this folder. It'll run it from a different location. So I'm going to show you a little trick you can do here called the working directory. So we're going to say -w, and that stands for the working directory. It's a shortcut of what is the startup directory, what's the folder in the container where any command should actually be executed from. So it kind of sets the context of where to run these commands. And I'm just going to say /var/www here, put the image, and then after that we can put the command that we want to run, and I want to run npm start. All right, so to review, we're going to say, hey, Docker, let's run on port 8080 on the external. 3000 is going to be internally what we're going to run, and I picked that on purpose because that's what this Express site will use by default. We could change it, but that's how it's set up currently. We're going to set up a volume that points to our source code in the current working directory. And then the volume, though, that's inside of the container that's going to point to this Express site folder is going to be var/www. Then we're going to go ahead and use that volume as our working directory. That way, when I run npm start, really what it's going to do is forward the call from var/www into this Express site, which we'll call into an area over here. All right, so a lot going on, but let's go ahead and try it out. And I'll just hit return here. All right, now you'll notice it started it up, but this time it's not running on my local machine. It's actually running in the Docker node container. So this is very, very cool because I've now linked my source code into this container. And even if I didn't have Node installed, if I just had the source code but didn't have Node on my dev machine at all, then we could still work with Node because obviously it would be loaded up in the container. All right, so let's try this out. Now, instead of going to localhost, I want to go to the IP address. Now, this will be the Docker machine IP. So we're going to go to 192.168.99.100. I'm not going to go to 3000 though. Back here, we said that, what did we put? We want to go from 8080 to 3000 internally in the container. So I want to use 8080 right there. We'll hit enter. All right, and you'll notice we get the exact same Express site. Now, just to kind of prove this, let me dive into the source code real quick. And so I'm just going to run off to this folder in users. And where's Express? There it is, Express site. And let's just come in. I'm going to do a change to the view. And right now it's loading the home page. This is called index. I'm just going to open this up in VS Code editor. We'll do a very simple edit. So it says welcome to title and say welcome to title running within a Docker container with a volume no less, which is pretty cool. All right, we're going to go ahead and save that. That should now be committed in the source code. And you'll notice, look at that. So now our source code is linked, and we just proved it, into the container. So now I can do all my edits locally, but I can actually run it in whatever container I want. Now, in this particular demo, I'm using Node.js, but this applies to PHP, ASP.NET, Python, whatever it is you want to run. So that's an example of the actual commands that we learned about, going back to up here, that would allow us to link our working directory, the current folder that is on our local machine on a Mac or Windows or even Linux, and we can now link that into the volume that we defined, this var/www, up in the container. Pretty cool stuff.